I have been building furniture now for about 1.5 years. I'm not a full-time woodworker, and one of the first things I ever built is this pretty ugly coffee table that you see there. During this 1.5 years, I'm always learning more. I'm just quickly showing some of the stuff I have. So the table here is the one where I'm actually sitting now, doing this voiceover for the video. Then in my kitchen, I built these John Malecki inspired bar stools, which were actually pretty tricky to make. I have done a few cutting boards, as you see here. They are heavily used. Dining table is this book matched walnut table I built last year. And then in my living room, the last one I did was this bourbon moth inspired whiskey table, which I converted into a TV stand. But now it was time to build a new coffee table or sofa table for myself. So I bought the plans from Foureyes for their spider table, and I always like to challenge myself, and I knew that this build would have a lot of techniques that I had never done before, so I was quite interested to see if I could actually pull it off. I have to say, I've been building some furniture by 731. I've been using bourbon moth plans. I have been using John Malecki video, but the plans by Foureyes are by far the best I have ever seen. It's not only the PDF or paper version that they provide, it's actually the whole full course where they have a video of every single step on the build, and they actually have everything in metric as well, which helps me a lot because I live in Finland, and most of the plans I've been using so far only come with imperial, which makes my life a bit tricky. So very nice that Foureyes actually has metric in their plans, but the key thing about their plans are the technique videos, and this is actually how you see me spending a lot of time during this build.
Temporary plywood sled will get the job done just as well. So here I'm grabbing a sled that I've used in the past, and I'm going to set my table saws fence to 16 inches and cut it along two edges to make it into a square panel.
So what I've done so far is to follow the plans carefully to start making the table legs. There are quite a few jigs that were needed during this build, and you see me building one here, but everything is instructed in the videos in the course very well. So this is something I couldn't do myself, not yet. I still consider myself being a very much a beginner woodworker, so it really helps because they show where to do the cuts, in what angles to do the cuts, where to place your dominoes, or if you don't have a domino, they also always explain how to do it with dowels or even pocket join or pocket holes. So very good experience, and in no time at all, and quite simply actually, I had these 4 table legs roughly ready. So very happy with the plans so far. If you've been following Foureyes videos, you know that those guys, they don't do anything in 90-degree angles. And when you do glue ups with the angles that they have, it's not easy actually, because you cannot just put a clamp like you would normally do in a simple build. So they also give very good instructions on the clamping calls that you can use to actually help with the glue ups, and the first ones you see me are actually here when I do the first glue up for the table legs. So again, very helpful and a very simple solution, but I don't know, I probably couldn't have figured it out by myself, even though the solution is simple, but very helpful, because these ones I can use in future builds as well. While the glue was drying, I started working on the panel, and I had some pre-milled material in my storage, so I decided to use what I have. The only problem is I didn't have enough full-length panels to make the full glue up, so I needed to do one with these 2 smaller sections, which was actually quite interesting for me to see how it turned up, because I've never done a panel without full-length boards, so you see it in the end result how it turned out, but this was interesting test, and I didn't want to buy new stuff anyway, because I had pretty much everything I needed. And for the panel glue ups, I always use the in and out method. If you don't know what it is, there's a lot of videos in YouTube explaining. But for me, that was a game changer, because with the in and out method, my panels nowadays are pretty much perfect, even if I say so myself. And as usual, I always use dominoes to make the glue up easier. So you don't really need a domino, but I think it's just a lifesaver. It makes things so much easier. Then after I had all the dominoes in, I wanted to try it out. Does this actually work? Is there a seam on that one tricky part? But it actually turned out very nice already at this phase, so I was quite sure that I could pull it off, even though I didn't have the perfect boards to work with. The way I nowadays do my panel glue ups is a technique I copied from Bourbon Moth, actually. So he always does the panel glue ups in this vertical mode, or horizontal, however you actually need to call it. But I used to do my glue ups on my assembly table, and it was always a bit tricky to get the glue in those domino holes and make everything fit nicely. So just putting it like this makes life a lot easier. So this is my go-to technique nowadays. And you see, I used 2 dominoes. They're very close to each other, just to make sure the alignment will be as perfect as it can be, as I had the small board to work with. But everything actually went very nicely, and you see me here. The fit is very tight, as it should be. After this, I obviously put the panel in normal clamps, so nothing special there. The only thing I did was to add this one, or actually 2 clamps, to make sure that the seam with my short boards would be as tight as it could be, and then I was done. Then it was ready to make another jig, which I didn't have, and again the plans had very good instructions how to make them. I couldn't follow the instructions exactly like it was done, because I think the jig plans were done for saw which is sadly not available in Finland, so I needed to tweak the plan a bit. But making this jig was anyway very easy, even though I actually had to modify it on a later phase. But this is a jig that I need for the next phase, which is to cut the groove to the table legs where I will be inserting the spline. So using my dado stack and the newly built jig, here you see me cutting the groove that I need for putting the spline in. Again, something I have never done before like this, so it was an interesting thing. I milled the piece of, I think that's maple actually, not even sure, but yeah, I think it's maple. So I milled it to fit the groove very, very closely. Then added quite a bit of glue, and then just hammered the piece in. And obviously I did the same for all of the 4 table legs. So it was an easy job with the jig. And here you see it from a different angle. I just hammered it in to make sure that the seam on the below wouldn't be visible at all. Now, with those splines drying up in the background, I started working on the stretcher, and here I made a deviation from the plans by making the stretcher shorter than it is in the original design, because I didn't want the table to be as long as it is in the original plan, but that was an easy adjustment to do. The next cut I forgot to film, so here you will see how I did it. Zoom! And then the next one, zoom! With a nice sound effect. I cut the spline very close to the line, and then I used my sander to get them flush with the table leg. After sanding it nice and flush, it was time to think about the 15-degree angle on the panel, and as you see my jig there, it's a bit wobbly. I did a few test cuts on a piece of plywood, and I really wasn't feeling safe, and I decided not to do the cut because it just seemed to be way too dangerous with the jig I had. So I wasn't happy, but even in the instructions they said that if you're not feeling safe with the cut, you can use a chamfer bit, for example, to make a 45-degree chamfer on the panel, and that is how I decided to go. But as mentioned, I was not happy with myself because I said I want to challenge myself, I want to learn new things. So the next morning I came back and actually started tweaking my jig to make it more stable. And I got it to be pretty nice, and then I decided to go for the cut that I was actually a bit scared to do. So I put my table saw to the 15-degree angle, and I made the cut. So you cannot really see it in my face maybe, but I was actually quite scared in making this because I've never done a cut like this, and it's not easy. It actually might look easy, but the panel really wants to go everywhere, and yeah, wasn't nice, but I made it, and you see I was actually very happy that I was able to do it. So then for the next cut I decided to put my dust mask on, because you see it was actually throwing quite a bit of dust. So then I did the cut on the other long end as well, and obviously the short ends after it. But I was very happy that I was able to get the jig working and to make the cut. The next phase was to add the angle to the legs, and again it required a new jig to be built, but it's very quick to make these jigs with proper instructions. So here you see how it turned out. So just push your table leg in and make the angle needed for basically finishing the table legs, ready to be glued up to the stretcher. For the glue up, I decided again to use dominoes for alignment and making the glue up easier. And obviously adding first the dominoes to the table leg, and then once I was done with that one, I used the same placement on the stretcher itself. So pretty standard way to do the glue ups here. And then for the actual glue up, I ended up using the same clamping support thingies that I used before. But as you see, I was using a lot of clamps for making this glue up, so I needed to do this in 2 sections. So I first did 2 opposite corners, and then the next morning when I came back, I flipped it over, and then I finished the glue up with the 2 other legs. So I'm not sure if this could have been done with a single one glue up, but I don't know. Mine was so full of clamps, so I couldn't make it happen. So this was an easy one anyway. It was quite late in the evening when I did the first one. On the original design, you see that the table legs are not directly attached to the panel. So I wanted to challenge myself and do the same thing. So using those dowels that I'm making here myself to try to follow the original design as closely as possible. So using the same maple I was using for the splines, I started making those dowels, and I got the fit actually very tight, which was what I was going for. So as this will be basically the only thing keeping the table base attached to the panel, so I went with as tight fit as I could. With my chop saw, I then cut the 4 pieces I needed. Before I attached everything together, it was time to sand the table base and everything to be nice and flush. It's much easier to do it now, obviously, than if you try to sand everything when the panel has been glued on it. So when everything was nice and sanded, then I decided to use my domino for cutting the holes that I need for those 4 pieces. And there was a different way actually in the instructions, but I opted for this way because I think it was actually easier way, but they do explain how to do this without a domino if you don't have one. But here you see It was a very tight fit, which was, as I mentioned, what I was going for, because basically I wanted this to be very, very tight, because there was only so much I could put glue in to the piece when I was done. So I actually needed to use my mallet to get them in, which is what I was going for. I do hope that the eventual wood movement won't cause any issues, but we'll see. One thing I didn't see in the instructions was how to actually mark the points where you will attach the table base to the panel. So maybe it's there, I just didn't see it, but I figured out my own way. I placed the pieces together, marked them with a pen, and then I just used the same domino to cut the hole exactly where it needed to go. So maybe there's a better way to do it, but for some reason I didn't find it in the plans and instructions. But it's not a big issue, because as you see here, I got them to fit nicely, and I wanted to keep the overall look to be kind of square, matching with the panel. So I only added very small round over to the outer section on the legs, and then for everything else I just broke the edge with my sandpaper, so just to make sure there's no splinters or anything. But then it was time to start the final sanding, and there's nothing special about the sanding method I did. So from 80 to 120 to 150 to 180, and before the final grit, as I always do, I do the water popping, just to make sure that after the final sanding and applying finish, everything will be nice to the touch. And obviously followed the very same process for the panel as well. So while the table legs were drying, I did the same thing for the panel, and then again while this was drying, then I started doing the final sanding for the legs. And now obviously I'm getting very close in getting this table done. So the only thing left to be done was to add a finish, and I'm using Rubio as always, pretty much for the same reasons than everybody else. It's nice and easy, very hard to fail, very easy to apply. So Rubio for me is the go-to finish that I pretty much use every single time. And then for the table legs, I was just using a cloth to apply the Rubio, and then I was actually done. So here you see I took it out to the sun to show the end build. Very, very happy actually with how it turned out, because as I mentioned in the beginning, this was a challenge for me. It was not an easy build, but I made it. So again, I learned a lot, and here you see that the seam on those boards actually turned out quite nice as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and please subscribe and like, and leave any comments. And here you see the final resting place, the Foureyes spider table living very nicely together with bourbon moth. So you see, they are friends.